All right, so let's look at example 1. Example 1, we're taking a trinomial, x squared plus 14x plus 48, and what we're trying to do is factor it. So when we factor something, okay, what we're trying to do is if you think about, just a number, and you remember doing those factor trees, right? So if I had 12, we could factor 12 in multiple ways. I could say, well, 4 times 3 is equal to 12. And if you kept going on that, you could say 4 is 2 and 2, right? So you're trying to break this down, meaning 12 is really a product of these numbers. 2 times 3 is equal to 12. And so that's what we're trying to figure out here, except now we're not just dealing with a straight up number, okay? We're dealing with a whole trinomial here. So what does that look like? So it's got a specific process in play. So basically, instead of having just numbers, we're going to try to figure out, okay, if I have a parentheses times another parentheses where both of these two things are going to be binomials. If I multiply these two things together, I want to end up with what I originally started with, which is x squared plus 14x plus 48. So if we think back to the warm-up, right, I'm trying to come up with this part. I'm trying to come up with what are the two things that I'm going to multiply by, or the two parentheses that I'm going to multiply by, that gives me this result. And so what we're really doing here is thinking about multiplying that out, but just in a reverse fashion. So there's a couple different ways to factor this. I'm going to show you just kind of a very traditional way to do it, and then I'll show you another way that might be a little bit of a shortcut, and you can choose which way you do. So when you have to factor something, first of all, you want to make sure it's in standard form like this, where we have the squared term first, and then we have the x term, and then we have the number. We're going to think about, this is the first term right here, or the ax squared term. And you think about what multiplies up to x squared. There's really only one thing that can happen there. The only thing that multiplies up to x squared is just x times x. So that's going to go in these first two spots for these parentheses. I'm going to have an x here and an x. And then I'm going to think about the last term as well. And I'm going to think about what multiplies up to 48. And there's a few things that work there. 6 times 8 is 48. There's a bunch. Well, 12 times 4 is also 48. 16 times 3 is also 48. And so which combination is going to work here? So the correct combination is 6 times 8. Because if we now put this in to these spots of the parentheses, I'm going to put the 6 and 8 here. 6 and 8 here, and these are this is positive 6 and positive 8, so this is like plus. 6 plus 8 is equal to 14, so that's why I know that this is the correct combination here. In other words, if you were to multiply this out, if you were to take this and now just multiply it out like you did the warm-up, you should get the exact same thing that we started with, right? So you could check this, and this is going to be kind of a slower way to check, but this is the idea, is if you multiply this out, you'd get x squared, and then you would, of course, multiply the outsides, and you get plus 8x plus the insides. So you get plus 6x, and then plus 6 times 8, of course, is 48. And so you can see that in here we have this 8x plus 6x, which is the factors that we had there, and that adds up to 14x if we were to continue this problem. And you have x squared plus 14x plus 48. And so you can see this matches up with this, right? So my answer to this is the correct factoring here. X plus 6 times x plus 8 is how we factor that. So that's kind of a traditional way to think about factoring. And there are a lot of different ways, lots of different ways that you can do kind of the same pattern, but think about it just a little bit differently and structure it a little bit differently. One of those is called the snowflake method. So I'm going to put, this is the snowflake method. So I'm going to show you this one. This is one of many different ways you could do this. The snowflake method just goes like this. What you do is kind of draw a line and just kind of draw an X through that. And what you're going to do is whatever your A term is. So in this problem right here, the A term is 1. So I'd put a 1 here and a 1 here. So you put your two A terms here and here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take A times C and you're going to put it right here. A times C. So my C term is 48 and my A term is 1. So A times C, or 1 times 48, is 48. So I put a 48 up top here. Now down here, I put the B term. The B term is just 14. So I would just, right here, put a 14. Then in these spots, here and here, we're going to think about what is going to multiply up to 48 and will add up to 14. Kind of the same way we did down here. What's going to multiply up to 48? Well, that's going to be 6 and 8. 6 times 8 is 48. And 6 plus 8 is 14. So this is the correct pattern that we have. So the snowflake method, then we're going to take these two things here, 1 and 6, and then we have 1 and 8, and that's going to basically tell us our two binomials here, our two parentheses, right? So we have 1 and 6, that's going to be 1x plus 6, and then I'm also going to have 1x plus 8 there. And so we get the exact same answer there. So this is called the snowflake method. The nice thing about that method is that it scales pretty well, meaning as the problems get harder, like in section 4.4, as they get a little bit trickier, the snowflake method gives you a little bit more structure to follow and get those problems. So as we go through this, I'm going to kind of show you both methods. I'll kind of speed it up as we go along, but really, you know, pick whichever method is easiest and makes sense to you. All right, so if you look at the next ones, here's some practice problems. So if you feel like you got a little bit of a handle on that last one, you can go ahead and pause this and try these two problems on your own. And then I'm just going to go through them. So if you're still lost, you know, then you can continue following along here. So for part A, we have another trinomial, and we want to factor this. We want to factor this into two parentheses. So the traditional method you can think of is, hey, what multiplies up to x squared? Well, that has to be x and x. And then we can think about what multiplies up to 12, but also is going to add up to 8. So think about what multiplies up to 12 and adds up to 8. Well, that's going to be 6 and 2. And so here's my factoring here. And again, the way that I can check that is really just to check two things. Check this outside multiplication and the inside multiplication. I know that 2 times x, right, that's 2x. And the inside product here is 6 times x, it's 6x. If I add that, if I take 6x plus 2x, I do get 8x. So I know that this is the correct factoring right here. Now the snowflake method is pretty similar. You just take this, and let's go over that. Try that again. So with the snowflake method, we just take the A term, which is 1 and 1, and we take, on the top here, we take A times C, which is 12, and on the bottom, we take the B term, which is 8. and we're thinking about the same thing. What multiplies up to 12, but also adds up to 8? Same thing, right? We have 6 times 2 is going to give us 12, and also 6 plus 2 is going to give us 8. So therefore, this is going to be 1x plus 6 and 1x plus 2, just like we have up there. Okay, so again, with what I would say is, if you do this method right here, which is kind of, as you get going, will be more of a, you'll have to do a little bit more guess and check once you get to harder problems. Sometimes that top method will be really quick and easy, but I would say it's a little bit more advanced than the one on the bottom. The one on the bottom is going to give you nice structure. It might take a little longer on easier problems, but it definitely will help out when you get to harder problems. So from now on, I think I'm going to show you more of the this snowflake method. But again, feel free to use either. So, all right. So let's look at part B if we're going to factor that. Okay. Again, we want to figure out what those two parentheses are, right? If we use the snowflake method, we're going to draw a horizontal line here, cross in here, and we're going to put the A right here. The A is, again, simply 1 and 1. The A times the C value is negative 48. The B value is negative 2. So then we're going to think about what is going to multiply up to negative 48, but also what's going to add to negative 2. So what multiplies up to negative 48? Well, we have, we know that 8 times 6 is 48, right? And one of those has to be negative. So I'm going to make my 8 negative, because negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. And I know that negative 8 times 6 is negative 48. So this is the correct combination that I have here. And then if I want to get my parentheses up here, I'm going to take these two kind of columns that I just drew, and I can say that this is going to be 1x minus 8 and 1x plus 6. If you still wanted to check your answer, or if you were still unsure, you could then just multiply that out. But again, you should get the very first problem that we started with.